She stood
It doesn't
before the
matter what
mirror
you want.
in a crimson
You are
vintage
coming
Mugler
with me.
gown, her heart pounding against her ribs.
Please don't do this.
Tonight was her only chance to
doesn't
escape
matter
the
what you
ruthless
want.
boss of New
You
York's
are coming
Korean
with
syndicate.
me.
Then, his reflection materialized
don't
behind
do this.
hers. That dress
It doesn't
isn't
matter
leaving
what
this
you
house,
want.
he whispered,
You are coming with
and
me.
neither are you. The penthouse at
Please
111
don't do
Murray
this.
Street in Tribeca was a $30 million masterpiece of glass, imported Italian marble, and cold, unyielding steel. For most, it would be a dream home overlooking the sprawling, glittering grid of Manhattan. For Naomi, it was a high-tech, impenetrable prison. Naomi was a woman who commanded attention without trying. An African-American former corporate auditor from Chicago, she had skin the color of rich, roasted coffee and a brilliant, analytical mind that had unfortunately made her too valuable to the wrong people. 2 years ago, she had discovered a massive discrepancy in the offshore accounts of a shell corporation she was auditing. Before she could take her findings to the authorities, Alexander found her. Alexander was the modern face of an ancient, brutal legacy. While he operated under a strictly Western name to blend into the upper echelons of Wall Street, behind closed doors, he was the undisputed head of a ruthless, Korean organized crime syndicate. He didn't kill Naomi when he found out she had unraveled his financial web. Instead, captivated by her brilliance and her defiance, he absorbed her into his life. He paid off her debts, threatened her family from afar, and married her in a quiet, heavily guarded ceremony in Montauk. He called it protection. Naomi called it a hostage situation. Tonight was supposed to be her night of salvation. The annual St. Jude Charity Gala at the Pierre Hotel was the one public event Alexander insisted they attend to maintain their philanthropic facade. For Naomi, it was a carefully orchestrated rendezvous. She had spent 6 agonizing months, slowly siphoning the syndicate's hidden ledger data, billions in illicit funds tied to real estate, weapons, and extortion onto a micro USB drive no bigger than a fingernail. She stood in the center of her massive walk-in closet, staring at her reflection. She was wearing a breathtaking, custom-sourced, vintage Mugler gown. It was a deep, dangerous crimson, plunging dramatically at the neckline and entirely backless, clinging to her curves like a second skin. It was striking, it was provocative, and it was essential. The hem of the silk lining had been meticulously unstitched and resewn by her own hands, concealing the tiny USB drive. Tonight, amidst the flashing cameras and crowded ballroom, she was supposed to brush past a deep-cover FBI agent named Harrison, drop the drive into his pocket, and slip away through the hotel's service corridors to a waiting black SUV. She was adjusting a diamond teardrop earring when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Alexander stood in the doorway. He moved with the terrifying, silent grace of a predator. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his sharp, handsome features unreadable. He didn't say a word as he stepped into the closet, his polished Oxford shoes silent on the plush carpet. Naomi forced her heart rate to steady. She met his gaze through the vanity mirror. "Are we ready to go?" she asked, her voice a masterclass in smooth composure. Alexander didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly up behind her, his gaze sweeping over the exposed expanse of her dark skin, the daring cut of the crimson silk, and the subtle, nervous tension radiating from her shoulders. He reached out, his cool fingertips brushing the nape of her neck, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that always sounded more like a threat than a compliment. "Breathtaking, Naomi." "Thank you. The car is waiting downstairs, Alexander. We shouldn't be late for the step and repeat." His fingers trailed down her bare spine, tracing the vertebrae until they reached the low dip of the dress's back. Naomi held her breath, praying he wouldn't feel the rigid edge of the micro USB tucked near the side zipper. Suddenly, his hand clamped down on her hip hard. The illusion of a loving husband shattered instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating Mafia boss who ruled the eastern seaboard's underworld. "Where did you think you were going in this?" he asked, his tone dropping an octave, losing all warmth. "To the gala," Naomi replied, keeping her voice entirely level. "The one you insisted we attend. The one where the mayor will be sitting at our table." Alexander leaned in, his lips hovering mere inches from her ear. He caught her gaze in the mirror, his dark eyes entirely devoid of mercy. "You think I don't see it? The way you look at the door. The way you've been checking your encrypted messages. You think I don't know about the meeting you set up?" Naomi's blood turned to ice. "He knows." I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, her voice steady, though her hands gripped the edge of the vanity hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Alexander's grip tightened, bruising her hip through the silk. I run an empire built on knowing what people are going to do before they do it, Naomi. You are my wife. Do you honestly believe I wouldn't intercept a signal originating from my own network? He spun her around abruptly to face him. The sheer force of his presence was suffocating. He looked down at the stunning crimson gown, his eyes narrowing with a toxic mixture of intense desire and absolute rage. That dress isn't leaving this house, he stated, his voice a quiet, terrifying command. And neither are you, Alexander, the mayor. The mayor works for me! Alexander snapped, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second before sealing over again. I bought his campaign. He will sit at our empty table and smile for the cameras, and he will tell the press that my beautiful wife was suddenly taken ill. Take it off. No, Naomi said, taking a step back, her back hitting the vanity. The USB. If he took the dress, he would have it dry cleaned or destroyed, and the ledger would be found. I am going. You are staying exactly where I put you, he countered, stepping into her space, crowding her against the mirror. Take the dress off, Naomi, or I will tear it off you myself, and I promise you won't like how that feels. Knowing she was physically outmatched, and terrified he would rip the hem and discover her secret, Naomi's trembling hands reached for the side zipper. She unfastened it, stepping out of the crimson silk, leaving her shivering in nothing but her undergarments. Alexander scooped the dress off the floor with one hand. He looked at her, his expression a chilling mask of ownership. You belong to me. Never forget that. He turned on his heel and walked out of the closet, taking the dress and the only key to her freedom with him. The heavy, reinforced oak door of the penthouse master suite clicked shut, followed immediately by the electronic beep of the biometric lock engaging. Naomi was locked in. She collapsed onto the edge of the California king bed, dragging her hands down her face. Panic, sharp and acidic, clawed at her throat. The FBI was waiting at the Pierre. If Harrison didn't get the ledger tonight, the operation would be scrubbed. The federal task force would assume she had turned double agent, or worse, that she was dead. She would be left completely alone in Alexander's world. She needed to think. She needed the dress. Through the thick walls, she heard the muffled sound of the penthouse's private elevator arriving. Alexander was leaving. He wouldn't stay. He had appearances to keep up, even if it meant showing his face at the gala for 10 minutes to spread the lie about her sudden illness. Naomi stood up, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. She quickly pulled on a pair of dark cashmere sweatpants and a fitted black sweater. She approached the suite door and pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. She tapped the control panel beside the door. Access denied. He had locked her inside the master wing. However, Alexander's arrogance was his one blind spot. He believed his technology was flawless, but Naomi was an auditor. Her entire career was built on finding loopholes in flawless systems. The master suite connected to Alexander's private study through a shared ventilation duct, designed to keep the climate control perfectly balanced. It was small, but Naomi was slender. More importantly, she knew exactly where he would have put the dress. He wouldn't throw it away. He was obsessed with her things. He would have hung it in his private, climate-controlled vault inside the study, a room he used to store cash, illegal firearms, and the servers for his encrypted Proton Mail and Trezor hardware wallets. Naomi dragged a heavy velvet ottoman to the corner of the room, climbing onto it to reach the brushed steel vent near the ceiling. Using a heavy silver hair clip from her vanity, she began unscrewing the custom security bolts. It took her 10 agonizing minutes, her fingers bleeding and raw, before the grill popped free. She hauled herself up into the duct. The metal was freezing, and the space was suffocatingly tight. She dragged herself forward, inch by inch, the dust coating her clothes. Her mind flashed back to how she had gotten the data in the first place, sneaking into this very study at 3 a.m., while Alexander was downstairs holding a brutal tribunal with a rogue triad faction. She had risked her life to copy those files. She wasn't going to lose them now. She reached the vent overlooking the study. Peering through the slats, the room was dark, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the server racks. She kicked the vent out and dropped gracefully onto the Persian rug below. The room was silent, but she knew she wasn't completely alone in the penthouse. Gideon, Alexander's hulking, sociopathic head of security, was undoubtedly stationed in the main living area, watching the surveillance monitors. Fortunately, the study was a complete blind spot. Alexander didn't allow cameras in the room, where he conducted his most illicit business. Naomi moved swiftly toward the vault door at the back of the room. It was a heavy steel door, equipped with a retinal and fingerprint scanner. She couldn't fake a retina, but she didn't need to. She just needed the dress. She looked around the study. Alexander was meticulous, but he had habits. He always drank a glass of Macallan 25 before leaving for a high-stress event. Naomi spotted the crystal tumbler resting on his mahogany desk. She grabbed a roll of clear packing tape from his desk drawer and a soft, incredibly fine makeup brush she kept in her pocket for precisely this kind of emergency. She dusted the glass lightly with a bit of graphite she scraped from a pencil, revealing a perfect thumbprint. Carefully, she applied the tape, lifting the print, and pressed it smoothly over her own thumb. She walked to the vault, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She placed her taped thumb onto the glass scanner. A red laser swept over her finger. Beep, beep. The light turned green. The heavy bolts inside the door retracted with a loud mechanical clunk. Naomi pulled the door open and slipped inside the vault. It smelled of cold steel and old money. Stacks of bundled $100 bills sat on shelves next to sleek black firearms. And there, draped over a velvet hanger in the corner, was the crimson muggler gown. Naomi rushed to it, dropping to her knees. She ran her hands along the heavy silk hem. She felt the rigid, rectangular shape of the micro USB. She bit the thread, tearing the expensive fabric without hesitation, and pulled the tiny drive free. She squeezed it in her palm, a victorious sob catching in her throat. She had it. Now, she just had to get out of the penthouse. She turned to leave the vault when suddenly the penthouse was plunged into absolute darkness. The humming of the servers died. The air conditioning stopped. A split second later, the emergency backup lights flickered on, casting the study in a harsh, pulsing red glow. Then the alarm started screaming, a deafening, high-pitched wail that meant the perimeter had been breached. Naomi froze. Alexander wouldn't trip his own alarm. The FBI didn't do dynamic, unannounced entries like this without cutting the alarms first. A massive explosion shook the floorboards, rattling the crystal decanter on the desk. Automatic gunfire erupted from the main living room, the unmistakable heavy chatter of suppressed submachine guns. Someone was hitting the penthouse. Naomi pressed herself against the cold steel of the vault interior, clutching the USB drive to her chest. She heard heavy, frantic footsteps approaching the study. The heavy oak doors burst open, splintering off their hinges. It was Gideon. His usually pristine black suit was torn to shreds, and blood was pouring from a massive wound in his shoulder. He was clutching a heavy assault rifle, his eyes wild with adrenaline. He saw the open vault and locked eyes with Naomi. He didn't raise his gun at her. Instead, he coughed, blood splattering his chin, and slammed the heavy study doors shut, locking the deadbolts. Rival faction, Gideon gasped, sliding down the wall, leaving a thick smear of crimson on the expensive wallpaper. The Volkov Syndicate. They found out Alexander wasn't here. He looked up at Naomi, his eyes losing focus as the sounds of heavily armed men breaching the outer hallway echoed through the wood. They're not here to rob the place, Naomi, Gideon choked out, raising his weapon toward the door. They're here to take you. Naomi stood in the red emergency light, trapped between the man paid to keep her prisoner, the rival Mafia hit squad tearing through the walls to kidnap her, and the tiny piece of plastic in her hand that could destroy them all. The heavy oak doors of the study buckled under the concussive force of a breaching charge. Dust and splinters rained down as the heavy wood gave way, hanging precariously off a single twisted hinge. Naomi watched from the shadows of the open vault, the micro USB clutched so tightly in her dark palm that the plastic casing cut into her skin. Gideon didn't flinch. Despite the blood pooling rapidly on the Persian rug beneath him, the head of security raised his assault rifle and unleashed a deafening volley of suppression fire through the shattered doorway. Screams echoed from the hallway as heavy booted footsteps scrambled for cover. "Close the vault, Naomi!" Gideon roared over the ringing in her ears, slamming a fresh magazine into his weapon. "They're led by Leo Mercer!" He doesn't leave witnesses, and he definitely doesn't leave leverage behind. Lock it down. Leo Mercer. Naomi had seen the name in Alexander's encrypted ledgers. Mercer was a brutal, uncompromising fixer for a rival faction, a man who specialized in high-profile abductions. If Mercer took her, she wouldn't just be a hostage. She would be bait to lure Alexander into a slaughter, and then she would be disposed of. Another grenade rolled through the doorway, a flashbang. Cover your eyes! Gideon shouted. Naomi threw her arms over her face and squeezed her eyes shut. The explosion was a blinding, white-hot physical blow that sucked the air from the room and left a high-pitched whine shrieking in her skull. When she blinked the spots from her vision, Gideon was slumped over, his weapon silent. He was gone. Through the smoke, 3 heavily armored men stepped into the study, their tactical flashlights cutting through the red emergency lighting. At the center was Leo Mercer, a towering, broad-shouldered man with cold, dead eyes. He stepped over Gideon's body without a second glance and locked his gaze on the heavy steel door of the vault. "Mrs. Naomi," Mercer called out, his voice a smooth, unsettling drawl that echoed in the ruined room. "Alexander's beautiful, brilliant wife. Come on out. We have a helicopter waiting on the roof, and we wouldn't want to ruin that flawless skin of yours by extracting you the hard way." Naomi's brilliant, analytical mind raced. She was trapped in a steel box. The vault had no secondary exit. In minutes, they would set thermite charges to melt the locking mechanism, or worse, pump gas through the ventilation. She was out of options, out of time, and completely out of her depth. But she was an auditor. Her entire life was built on understanding systems, finding their vulnerabilities, and exploiting them. She looked at the internal control panel beside the vault door. Alexander didn't just store money here. He stored his servers. Servers that housed billions of dollars in cryptocurrency and blackmail material. To protect those servers from fire, the study wasn't equipped with standard water sprinklers. Water would destroy the hard drives. Instead, the room was rigged with a halon gas fire suppression system. Halon displaced oxygen, extinguishing fires instantly. It also extinguished human life if they didn't evacuate the room in 30 seconds. Mercer's men were attaching blocks of C4 to the vault hinges. 10 seconds, Naomi, Mercer barked. Last chance. Naomi didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand against the heavy steel door, throwing her weight into it until it clicked shut, the heavy deadbolts engaging, sealing her inside the airtight safe. She turned to the internal override panel, her dark fingers flying across the keypad. She bypassed the thermal sensors and manually triggered the fire alarm for the study. Outside the vault, a mechanized female voice echoed from the ceiling speakers. Fire suppression protocol initiated. Halon discharge in 10 seconds. 9, 8. What the hell is that? One of Mercer's men yelled, his muffled voice barely penetrating the thick steel of the vault. 7, 6. She armed the system. The doors are electronically sealed, Mercer roared, his calm facade shattering. Blow the vault now. 3, 2, 1. Discharging. From inside the safe, Naomi heard the dull, heavy thump of the explosive charges detonating against the vault door, but the steel held. Then, she heard the unmistakable hiss of the pressurized halon gas flooding the study. The shouting outside quickly turned into violent, desperate coughing. The heavy thuds of armored bodies hitting the floor followed. Halon was unforgiving. It stripped the oxygen from the air faster than a man could hold his breath. Naomi sat on the cold floor of the vault, surrounded by stacks of Alexander's blood money, shivering in the dark. She waited 10 agonizing minutes, counting every second in her head, letting the emergency exhaust fans cycle the deadly gas out of the study. When she finally pressed the internal release handle, the vault door swung open with a heavy groan. The study was a graveyard. Mercer and his men lay unconscious or dead on the floor. Naomi didn't check their pulses. She stepped over Mercer's body, grabbed a discarded tactical jacket to cover her bare shoulders, and bolted for the shattered doorway. The penthouse was eerily silent. The Volkov syndicate had clearly neutralized the rest of Alexander's security detail, but with Mercer's team down, the path to the service elevator was clear. Naomi slipped through the shadows of the $30 million prison, swiped a dead guard's access card, and summoned the freight elevator. As the metal doors closed, separating her from the carnage, she looked down at her hand. The micro USB was still there. She had survived the syndicate. Now, She just had to survive the FBI. The descent down 60 floors felt like an eternity. Naomi emerged into the subterranean loading dock of 111 Murray Street. The damp, frigid air of the New York night hit her face, a stark contrast to the stifling tension of the penthouse. She pulled the oversized tactical jacket tighter around herself, her dark cashmere sweatpants blending into the shadows of the alleyway. She navigated the back streets of Tribeca, her senses hyper-aware. Every passing headlight, every echo of a footstep felt like a target on her back. She walked briskly toward the subway, catching a downtown train, switching lines twice to ensure she wasn't being followed, before finally taking a cab to the Upper East Side. The Pierre Hotel loomed against the night sky, a beacon of high society and corrupt wealth. The St. Jude Charity Gala was in full swing inside the grand ballroom. Alexander was likely in there right now, shaking hands, playing the grieving husband whose wife had fallen suddenly ill, completely unaware that his empire was currently burning to the ground in Tribeca. Naomi bypassed the glittering main entrance, slipping down a cobblestone service alley near 61st Street. This was the rendezvous point. Standing beneath the flickering amber light of a street lamp was Special Agent Harrison. He was a tall, clean-cut man in a standard-issue trench coat, smoking a cigarette. He looked up as Naomi approached, his posture relaxing slightly. "Naomi," Harrison breathed, tossing the cigarette onto the wet pavement and crushing it beneath his shoe. "Thank God. We caught the police chatter on the scanners. A massive shootout at your building. We thought you were dead." "I almost was," Naomi said, her voice raspy. She stopped, 10 feet away from him, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The Volkovs hit the penthouse. They killed Gideon and the rest of the detail. Alexander wasn't there. "Are you hurt?" Harrison asked, taking a step forward. "I'm fine," she replied, holding up her hand to stop him from coming closer. "I have the ledger. Everything is on it. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the bribes paid to the mayor, the NYPD brass, the Port Authority. It's all here." Harrison's eyes locked onto her clenched fist. A hungry, desperate gleam flashed across his face. "You did it. You actually did it. Hand it over, Naomi. I have a federal safe house waiting in upstate New York. You'll be placed in witness protection by morning. Alexander will never find you." Naomi took a breath, preparing to hand over the drive that would finally buy her freedom. But as Harrison reached out his hand, the street lamp caught the metal at his wrist. His trench coat sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal his watch. It was an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, platinum, with a bespoke sapphire dial. It wasn't just an expensive watch, it was a custom piece. Naomi knew this because she had audited the invoice for them 6 months ago. Alexander had commissioned exactly 12 of them in Geneva. He gave them exclusively to his silent partners, the judges, politicians, and federal agents he had bought and paid for. A federal agent making $90,000 a year didn't wear a $200,000 custom syndicate watch. Naomi's blood ran cold. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Alexander hadn't intercepted her encrypted messages tonight. He hadn't found out about the drop from his own network. Harrison told him. Harrison was dirty. He had been playing her from the start. Alexander had let her think she was working with the FBI, using Harrison to monitor her every move, waiting to see exactly how much data she could steal before he crushed her. That was why Alexander had been so confident in the closet. That was why he knew about the drop. "Naomi?" Harrison asked, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong? Give me the drive. We don't have time." "You're right," Naomi said, her voice dropping into a deadly calm. "We don't." She reached into the pocket of the tactical jacket. Her fingers brushed against a spare, empty flash drive she always carried on her keychain. A decoy, a habit from her corporate espionage days. She pulled the empty drive out and held it up. "This is it. The key to the kingdom." Harrison smiled, a greasy, relieved expression that made Naomi sick to her stomach. He reached out and snatched the drive from her fingers. "You did good, kid. Really good." "Protection is paramount, right, Harrison?" Naomi asked softly. Harrison froze, his eyes widening. That was Alexander's personal motto. Before Harrison could reach for the weapon holstered beneath his coat, Naomi turned and sprinted toward the crowded, chaotic avenue of Fifth Avenue. "Stop!" Harrison shouted, realizing he had been made. But he couldn't fire his weapon. Not here, not with hundreds of gala attendees, paparazzi, and valet drivers just 50 yards away. Naomi melted into the crowd of wealthy socialites and tourists, her dark clothes making her virtually invisible in the night. She didn't look back. She kept running until her lungs burned, until she reached the safety of a crowded 2-4 hour diner in Queens. Sitting in the fluorescent lit booth, she ordered a black coffee. She pulled her real prize from her pocket, the micro USB wrapped in the torn crimson silk of the Mugler gown. She wasn't going to trust the FBI. She wasn't going to trust the police. She pulled out a burner phone she had stashed weeks ago and opened an encrypted browser. She didn't send the files to the authorities. She sent the entire decrypted ledger directly to the private servers of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, specifically targeting the direct inbox of Senior Director Gerard Ryle, along with simultaneous drops to the New York Times and the Washington Post. By sunrise, the story would break. Alexander's empire would be splashed across every headline in the world. His assets would be frozen, his politicians exposed, and his rivals would tear whatever was left to pieces. Naomi took a sip of her coffee, watching the early morning light break over the New York skyline. She had entered Alexander's world as a captive, a brilliant bird locked in a gilded cage. But she was leaving it as the architect of his destruction. That dress never left the house, but Naomi did. Did Naomi's brilliant escape leave you speechless? If you love this intense real-life mafia drama, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. We drop high-stakes, heart-pounding stories every week that you won't want to miss. Share this video with your friends and tell us in the comments, how would you have escaped Alexander's penthouse? Click the bell icon so you never miss an upload